Hi, everyone. I'm Adriana,
Hi, and I'm Tanya.
and this is Closing the Gap, a social justice podcast focused on looking for solutions to combat social issues that affect our everyday lives. It feels so great to be
We
back.
are back. Season 2. Best
Yeah,
season yet.
we honestly learned a lot from season one. And we're just really
hmm
excited to kind of take all of that and just continue growing with our podcast.
Definitely. Always improving, always growing and evolving, as I'm sure all of you have over the summer.
Speaking of the summer, we've been up to a lot. That is one of the reasons why we did take a little bit of a break. I actually just moved to New York. I'm
Woo!
back in June, something I've always wanted to do, and it finally just worked out. Tanya also was up to something amazing during the summer.
I spent the summer in Colombia for a little over 2 months. And yeah, I'll talk about it in a bit, but it was just a great way to reconnect with my roots, with my family, kind of remind myself what I'm doing here. So it's been busy summers for both of us.
Yeah, definitely. And, with the summer coming to its end, we are get ready to get back into it. But I feel like a lot of this change that we've experienced has taught us a lot. So we're really happy to take this intro back episode to take time to share what all of this change has meant for us and how it changed our lives for the better, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it's great context. I mean, of course, there are going to be themes throughout this season, there are going to be guests, but I think sometimes it's good to know why we choose certain guests, why we choose certain themes, because of course, whatever is affecting us affects the podcast. And so that way it's good to be transparent with all of you. And then if you all relate, we hope you share your stories and then we can all kind of talk about them through together. So it's a great way to just kind of decompress and kind of maybe get some things off our chest too.
Yeah.
This is our form of therapy.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
But Tanya, if you want to go first and kind of share a little bit about like what it was like living in Colombia for the summer. I mean, just sounds so amazing.
It was. So leading up to it was not very amazing. This has been something I've been wanting to do for a few years. So, as a daughter of two Colombian citizens, I automatically can get citizenship. And I wanted to do that before I went, just because it's easier to move around. You can get an ID, your Colombian passport, things like that. And I thought, well, since obviously I'm not applying for it, it's kind of my birthright. I can, show up to the consulate in LA. It'll be easy. I'll get it in a few months. That's not what happened. It was just a lot of issues with the paperwork, and so a lot of people started doubting me and started like asking, even my own family members started being like, "Why are you even going? Are you sure this is safe?" And it really just reminded me of how we as people in the US don't see the value in other countries sometimes. And we kind of, America is the best, the US is the best.
Which
And
clearly we're
it's,
not. If
yeah,
you've been
like
listening to this podcast, you know it's not.
there are great things and not so great things about everywhere. I mean, everywhere there are people, and we people are just not perfect. So, of course, nowhere is going to be perfect. So, it really had to I had to convince myself that this was really what I wanted because of all the doubt around me. And I had to convince other people around me. And I think it wasn't until I went and showed people the beauty of Colombia that people actually started to believe me, which, like I said, my own family, that wasn't something fun to go through, but it did prove to me at least that whenever we have an inkling, whenever we have like this thing that we feel like is our purpose, we really should go for it, especially because for me personally, I wanted to do it because it hadn't been in over 10 years. And a lot of the articles and a lot of the things we talk on this podcast is about Colombia. And so it feels kind of weird to talk about something that I hadn't even visited, hadn't even talked to people in a long time other than Colombians here in the US. So I loved every second of it. It just reminded me of the beauty of my culture, my heritage, my food. It was so good, even
I
though I got
bet.
sick a lot.
Oh,
Yeah, that was not fun. So there's definitely interesting things. And I saw some family members that I actually hadn't talked to in a long time.
oh,
And so it was interesting. It was interesting to see that there was my dad's dad, my grandpa. He hasn't talked to our family in a long time. And I saw him holding the same grudges that he was holding when I was a young girl. And it just made me realize, wow, some people really just don't change.
yeah.
And so it was interesting to have experience with that. Just kind of like, all that generational trauma that we carry, right, was kind of right in my face. And those are the things that I think I'm trying to heal through this podcast. I'm just talking about it and just connecting with all of you. And sometimes here in the US, it can feel like maybe we're escaping from that by not being in the country where our parents are from. So I think just being reminded of it, or being reminded of how to get through it, and also of the beautiful side. Colombia, for those who don't know, is the second most biodiverse country in the world, meaning there's just so many plants and animals that you don't find in other places as well. So it's just amazing for me as someone who loves nature. Like, that is the place to go see nature. And that reminded me of why I love it so much. And so it was a lot of different things, right? The human aspect, and also the aspect of what am I doing here in the US? How am I trying to help my country, even if I'm far away? And a personal accomplishment, I guess, because of all that paperwork that I had to really get through and all that doubt that I had to really overcome when it felt like no one was on my side. So glad I went. Also glad to be back, because apparently my stomach does not agree with some of the Colombian food. So maybe next time it'll be better in that sense.
Yeah, I'm sure now your body's maybe like more used to it, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting how we just rejected some things. But then also what happens after that? My tia, my aunt, she knew exactly what I needed. I got immediately better. And so that family too, that community, even if I hadn't seen them in a while, even people I hadn't met before, like my mom's cousins who I'd never met before, I felt like I had, because we were all family. So we kind of just got together. So I think that is the beauty of whatever connection you have with someone, no matter what it is. If you have something in common, as long as you find that, you'll find things to talk about, and that can lead to some amazing journeys for both of you. So very grateful I got time to go. And I went to different places in Colombia. I went to different cities. So I got to see different aspects of Colombia as well. Each city, each region kind of has like its own culture as well. So that's just interesting to me how, of course, people tend to be proud of like the country they're from, but even the city and the region that they're from. And each region is treated differently. Each region has different resources, the same thing that we see here in the US. Unfortunately, some have more than others. So I did come back realizing that there are a lot of stories I can learn from there, and that I can bring it to here, kind of spread the words for them. One example I'll give, just to kind of end this off, this little recap, is Palenque. That was like one of my favorite parts of Colombia. So Palenque is the first free village in all of the Americas, so North, Central, South America, and the first free one in the sense of after enslavement. So one not great part of Colombian history is that Cartagena, which is a city that we have in our coast, it was the largest slave trade port at one time during the slave trade. And so just so many people coming in there from Africa, of course, forced, and some people escaped. And so this group of about 30 people escaped about an hour out. If you don't know what Colombia is like, it's a lot of jungle. So just imagine being, I mean, I'm assuming no food, maybe even no shoes, very little stuff, going through the jungle. That can be very dangerous. We have a lot of poisonous animals. We have a lot of things that you don't want to necessarily encounter. And then they just created their village, and it's still standing today. They're still practicing African traditions to kind of honor that history. And there's tours there. You can just go and experience the history and also the people there, and how they celebrate through music. We saw them dancing. We saw them making music. So I can put their like biggest band in the show notes. And it's just lovely to see how from that really dark and horrible history, you can come out as long as you come together, and just created a place for them to exist, to be peaceful, even after all that trauma. So that was a great example for me of what it means to be not only Colombian, but also what it means to be anything that just requires coming together and overcoming something. So yes, there are places like that everywhere, I'm sure, but it was just great to see something like that in Colombia, and to know that I kind of have that history in me.
That's so awesome. And I'm so happy that you were able to connect back with your roots. I know we've talked about that in a previous episode, how important it is. So for you to have that opportunity is just amazing. I also want to add, I really loved seeing your Instagram stories while you were out there. For our listeners who don't follow Tania, she was just sharing her whole experience throughout the trip, and it was just beautiful. It was beautiful to see. And to your point, it's kind of like you being able to share your roots with, some people that are close to you, your followers. So that was just great. And just, I felt like you took a lot of moments as learning opportunities too, because I saw how you were sharing like different messages throughout your stories. And again, it was nice to see you going through that, because in a way it was also at least I'm sure I'm not the only one who like saw your story and felt the same way, you know?
Yeah, I think that is the power of just exactly sharing your story, of talking about it. I actually met up with someone when I was there in Cartagena,
Oh.
with someone from the UK who we just follow each other on Instagram. And she's like, "Oh, I'm actually in Cartagena as well." And so we met up. Her name's Scarlett Westbrook. She's also well, obviously she's also on Instagram. And she also posts great stuff about climate change. So I recommend following her. But she told me, "Oh, I didn't know like some of the facts about Colombia until I saw your stories. And now they're like just stuck in my head." And that's kind of what I think, just the power of sharing your story, but also being just transparent, because it's not like all just, Colombia is amazing. There are a lot of times where I was saying, yeah, I can't just walk off on my own. Like I have to know where I'm going and with who to be safe. So there are still a lot of aspects that I wish weren't like that, but that is just the reality. And so sharing those parts as well, just being very transparent, can help someone else.
Yeah, definitely. It's again, it's important to share our stories.
Yeah, just being authentic. I've really kind of honed into that word lately. I think because of all that doubt that was happening leading up to Colombia, I really had to look into myself and just be like, well, who am I? What are my goals? What am I trying to do with this? Like, why do I really want to go? It's not just like a trip, right? There's a lot of reasons for it because of all the history that it holds within me. And so I really just had to tell myself, like, I'm not living my life for anyone else. I'm trying to be authentic and show up as myself anywhere, no matter, if some people don't like that, like, that's fine. I'm not here to please everyone. Like, no one should be. We have to just do what makes us happy. And so I really have just been telling myself, just be authentic to myself and things will work out.
Love that. And it's a lesson I think a lot of us can take. We are all here, we're all valid, and we are all allowed to take up space.
Exactly. We're valid to take up space, and we're valid to like change our minds, I think, as well. Is something that came up a lot because, well, so those family members that didn't really believe in the idea of me going because they were just worried for my safety eventually realized, like, you know what, after seeing my pictures, after hearing my experience, we're like, it wasn't that bad. And so realizing that maybe you're not always right isn't necessarily a bad thing. We don't have to be right all the time. And it doesn't even have to be right or wrong. It's just, oh, I just realized I was taught this. I was taught that Colombia isn't safe because of Hollywood, because of the news, because of what I've heard. That's totally fair. At one point, it really wasn't safe, but now it is. And now it is within reason. And so just challenging those beliefs that you may have had, and in a gracious way. It's not like, oh, well, haha, I told you so. Like, look at me, I'm doing great. Like, it doesn't have to be like that either. We can just realize, oh, I was wrong, my bad. I'm glad you had a great time, and we can just all move forward. And that just requires listening to others, really listening.
For sure.
And yeah, hearing is one thing, but listening is another. So it's a great way to just grow.
And you know what? It's funny that you're saying that because, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, over the summer I moved to New York. Same thing. A lot of my family members didn't want me to come out here because of their concern for safety. I would be lying if I didn't say towards the end, before coming out here, I started to get a little scared. I got a little nervous because of what they were kind of projecting onto me. And I remember having a talk with my older brother about it and him mentioning, like, they're scared because they're coming through with a different perspective, but don't let that hinder what you really want, and don't let their projections, because they're scared for other reasons, like they're projecting onto you. There's no need for you to be scared. So like you saying that really resonate. Obviously, like New York, there's certain areas that maybe aren't the safest, but same thing, like what we see in the media, we're told about how bad it is, how, like all of these things are going on. And granted, yes, things do happen, but I think if you're cautious and you're aware of your surroundings, you can be in these areas. Like, you shouldn't take someone's word for it. Especially, I think that was the biggest thing my older brother was calling out, is like, they're not even from there. They haven't been there. Unless they've experienced it, they can't really speak on it. Now that I've been here for a few months, I've heard some stories. There have been some times where, like, maybe, yeah, I feel a little weird, but thankfully I feel overall really safe out here. Currently, I live in Brooklyn, specifically in Bushwick. I really love this area. I think I got really lucky with where I ended up. The area I'm in is very inclusive. I just see, like, I can feel the vibe of this part of the city, and there's just a lot going on. It's pretty young now. I will say, though, there are times where I do feel a little bit of guilt, because I do know, and if anyone who is pretty familiar with New York, Bushwick wasn't necessarily the nicest part of Brooklyn. A lot of places in Brooklyn actually weren't, but because of gentrification, things have changed. And there are times where I do feel a little bit of that guilt that we've talked about in like last season. And for that reason, I really want to, challenge myself to, if I am going to be a part of this community, to give back to it, at least. As one person, I can only change so much. Gentrification is just something that's bound to happen, but I think it's important to still be mindful of it, right? So I think that's kind of how I combat like those feelings of guilt. I really want to give back to this community. I understand how privileged I am to be able to make a move from California to New York. It also was really challenging to find a place out here. That's kind of where I first saw like the real effects of gentrification, and talking to people who are locally from here. The price difference in rent, although it's not as crazy as it is in Manhattan, it is significantly different from what it used to be, which is insane. But it took me months to find my apartment. And let me tell you, I was ghosted plenty of times. There was one moment where I thought I was not going to make my deadline of moving out here in June, but thankfully everything worked out. And again, I'm just very grateful to be out here. I love New York. I think it's really important to kind of share with you all listeners because, I do feel like I'm going to get more involved in social issues that are going on here in New York. So you're probably going to hear a little bit of it more talk in this season. So
yeah, I think from both of our stories, and especially Adriana's, we can kind of take away, or I can kind of take away two things at least. When you were saying like you can hear what other people's advice is, but not necessarily make it your own, because every reality is different, right? So the reality of each person is going to be different. What the things we believe or the things we've heard is going to be different. And yeah, just another perspective. So it's listening to everyone, but not necessarily just because you listen to everyone means that you have to become what everyone wants you to be. And I think that's a part of being what inclusive actually means. And for me, inclusive, like an area where Adriana is now, isn't just diversity, isn't just, oh yeah, I see different races, I see different genders, I see different sexual orientations. We're inclusive. It's about actually welcoming people to the area, no matter where they're from, no matter what they look like, no matter what their story is. I think there is a difference there, and we kind of touched on it before as well. All this to say, if you haven't listened to season 1, you probably should, since we're talking about things from there. But yeah, being diverse and inclusive is very different. And so I think diverse can be like something you can stamp on something. And of course, diversity is needed, but inclusivity is actually where we want to not only hear your story, but listen. It's not only seeing you, but validating you. The other thing that I took away from what you were saying too is change is just the only thing that we know is actually going to happen. If change is the only for sure thing that's going to happen, we can lean into that and we can actually create something good out of it. So we all know things are going to change. Bushwick is changing. Brooklyn is changing. It's not looking how it was before. That's affecting a lot of people. And that you can't necessarily control, but you can control how you respond to that and your place in that. And so just owning that is really the responsible thing to do.
I also definitely feel like, because I know, and we've also talked about burnout with, there's so many social issues going on. And because change is a constant, we can't just give up, like when something happens that we don't necessarily agree with, it's not a time to, all right, that's it. There's nothing we can do. If anything, it's more of a challenging moment for you to find a solution in those kinds of situations. And I think I could speak for me and Tania. It's like why we wanted to take these big changes in our lives this summer, just to kind of challenge ourselves as people. Again, I'm looking at this as an opportunity living out here now to learn more about this community, uplift my own roots from Southern California and try something different and just, be more a part of a community. It's something scary at times, but again, it's good to challenge yourself for sure. And same thing with Tania, just being able to reconnect with those roots and learn more about her culture. It's just very important for us to have those experiences for ourselves.
Yeah, and with change, and there's different types of changes, right? But I think the change that we want to create in society is more long-term, of course. We want policies, norms of being inclusive, of being more mindful of people, of being more human-centered rather than money-centered or rather than status-centered. We want all of that to be long-term. And with that said, I think that's why it's important to really emphasize that I was and Adriana is in these places for a while. And even when you're not there, doing what you can from far away. And even if you only visit a place for a couple of days, you can still have a positive impact if you have the intention to. Whether that's just going to volunteer for a day or going to donate for a day, whatever that is for you. So, but of course, the change in the end is long term. And so it is about focusing on who's there, who's in that community, and how can I support them. So there's that, different types of changes, but of course, the one that we want. needs more intention and more effort.
Yeah, definitely. And again, those experiences that we have, we carry on with ourselves. So to Tanya's point, even if it is something that's kind of a quick experience, a quick trip or whatnot, it does stick with you, and hopefully it leaves a long lasting impact.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all about getting out of your comfort zone, just getting out of your routine and going somewhere for a day, meeting someone new, trying something new. Something else I did this summer was go to this Earth Edition festival in LA. I gave a talk there, but I also attended the rest of the day at the festival. And there were a lot of great speakers. I don't know if the recordings are going to come out, but if they are, we can talk about it and give everyone links. But there was one link that I'll for sure add, and it's Dr. Shamel Bell's work. She's a professor at Dartmouth, a lecturer. She actually helped create Black Lives Matter. She's like one of the first people that were involved. And her big thing was that we need to make sure we include music and dance into our activism. She felt like that was very powerful. And so we did a workshop called a somatic workshop. Like people I hadn't met before, we all got in a circle and everyone chose a dance move that they liked. So I chose like salsa because of Colombian. Some people chose different things. And then we all created a choreography together. And at the end, she's like, what did you all take away from this? And my thing was every dance, everyone was validated through that. Whatever you come with is valid. And we can all join together and bring those different realities together to make something beautiful. So that's just something I took away of getting out of my comfort zone, meeting these new people, doing something that seemed weird maybe to others. But at the end of the day, it's beautiful just to be part of that new community. Definitely recommend her work, and just another way of showing that change can be good. Meeting new people and trying new things can be something that brings light and joy to your life.
Well, be sure to add her info to the show notes. As always,
Yes.
we have some good stuff in there.
Definitely.
And to kind of bring it back, as I was saying, want to get more involved in New York politics and social issues, and thought it would be kind of a good time to bring up just a few things that have been happening in New York while I've been here. Probably one of the hardest things I've had to hear this summer, the recent killing of a 28-year-old gay man here in Brooklyn. I don't know the specific area, but just how I mentioned earlier that at least the area I'm in, Bushwick, it's very inclusive, very welcoming. So to hear that something happened in Brooklyn, specifically to someone who identifies as LGBTQ plus, was pretty shocking at the time. He actually was stabbed to death on July 29th at a gas station. Him and his friends were voguing to Beyonce. This also was what really shocked me, was the person who stabbed him to death. It did clearly from the video look like a hate crime, because they initially confronted O'Shea's group because of the dancing. The person who killed him was 17 years old. And that's just so many layers to kind of take on there. For one, no one should be killed, especially for just dancing and enjoying life. As we were just talking about it, everyone has a right to, take up space and be their authentic self. To hear that was really difficult to even, share it with other people. I remember being so frustrated and just not knowing what to do. My brother also, he identifies as LGBTQ plus, and just even feeling weird to share it with him and tell him to be careful and to be safe. So it's just a reminder that no matter where we are, we have to constantly be fighting and making sure that everyone is being welcome and being safe. No one's life should be in danger just because of their expression.
Yeah, their expression, what they look like, what people assume they are. You're right, there are a lot of layers.
And I think, it just kind of serves as a reminder that unfortunately these things can happen anywhere, and we really just need to make sure that we're constantly fighting for what's right.
I believe that's the key. Being an ally for other groups, being an ally for your community. And your community can mean a lot of different things, but your physical community, your digital community, who you identify with. In this case, if you don't identify as person did, if you don't identify as gay, being an ally is a great way to show up for the community, your physical community, but someone you don't necessarily identify with. And that's really what we should all be doing, because it shouldn't be, of course, on just the gay community to show up for gay people. It should be anyone. And to tell your brother, like, to be careful, of course, that it shouldn't come down to that. I mean, this is a child, 17 years old. There's no way he was born with that hate, right? He was shown it, he was demonstrated it. And so in that case, it's our job to make sure that doesn't happen for people in that community. Whatever part of community he was, clearly there was an anti-gay resentment there. And so it's our job to make sure that doesn't happen, that doesn't get spread. Because these things just can't keep happening. We can't just keep losing lives over things that really don't make sense and don't matter. And at the end of the day, are based out of fear. out of fear, and that we need to really look at ourselves and think, where did this come from? Where is the root cause of this hate? Because it's not from us. It's been here for decades, right? So it had to be from someone else passed down.
Exactly. It's taught. Hate is taught. And, kind of in that same vein, another big thing, I don't know why I was kind of surprised about it when I moved over here, but another big thing that's going on is a lot of anti-migrant rhetoric, specifically coming from Mayor Eric Adams. There is a pressure on New York as being kind of the safe haven for immigrants. New York City has recently seen a bigger influx of immigrants from the southern border who are seeking for asylum. And same thing, it's just the rhetoric that's being passed on specifically from the mayor is just teaching hate. It's just kind of using this fear tactic. At the end of the day, we are a country that was built off of immigrants. Again, it comes down to being more solution oriented versus showing it as a problem, making it an issue about, of course, it's always about money, always about funding. However, we're seeing a budget being used for the police department that doesn't necessarily need to be used. Versus, as always,
really doesn't, not in that extent, for sure.
As always, where's the funding for the community, for resources? Yeah, we're spending over $700,000 for, robots for the police department. That's a whole nother issue. We can link in some articles in the show notes, but
because they need more tools and weapons. Apparently they're not causing enough harm.
Exactly. There isn't a need to spread hate. That's really what it's coming down to. The migrant population here doesn't even want to be a burden to the city. They're literally seeking asylum. Really, they're just trying to get out of an awful situation that they had back in their home countries. So I think it can be all on us to be a little bit more compassionate and, question these policies on our local government. And, in that same vein too, how do we allocate resources? That's something we should always be asking, whether it's New York City or your own local city, asking how we're allocating the resources. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard there was quite a lot of flooding here in New York City. A lot of areas in Brooklyn and Queens were affected to the point where our subway systems a lot of them were shut down. There was so much criticism from the community on how there isn't proper funding for actually taking care of and maintaining the subway system. Like, it shouldn't be flooding from the tiles. But yet, here we are having these issues and clearly not being addressed. There's a lot going on in New York City, but I'm sure there's a lot going on in our own local cities. So just wanted to share a few things that were going on here.
Wow. How do we break all these things down? They're related, and yet they don't seem like they are. But of course, in this podcast, we know everything is related. Everything is intersectional. Theory of Intersectionality, season 1.
We're going to keep shamelessly plugging our first season.
Our own episode.
Sorry, not sorry.
We're building on top of season 1. That's what we're doing. I mean, yeah, we have their resource allocation, just not only how is like money aspect, but resources, power, and power in ways that we don't need, right? We don't need the type of power that's hierarchical. We need power where everyone has a say, because we really do all have like innate power. But this idea that only certain people do, or only certain people can have a voice in things that affect all of us, that's just all arbitrary. That's just all our system that we have. Also, this idea that immigration is just interesting to me, because most people that don't want immigrants to come, it's a few things, right? It's, I don't want to share my resources with anyone because I feel like they're going to run out. So it's that scarcity mindset. And it's like, who's actually taking your resources? It's not those immigrants that came with nothing. It's the people that are taking as much resources, as much money, as much jobs as they can. In New York, like Wall Street, hello. Like, there were so many places in New York that you can be focused on and not immigrants, asylum seekers, and asylum seeking is legal. And I think the only reason, I haven't looked this up myself, but I think the only reason they're in New York City in the first place is because our southern border has states like Texas. I know Texas is shipping immigrants to Chicago. So there are other states that aren't doing their fair share, what they should be doing, right? So it could be a lot in New York City, and it shouldn't be. It's
and
everyone's
honestly,
responsibility.
we could honestly do a whole episode on that. There actually are a lot of states who are doing that, sending immigrants to New York to deal with their problem.
Mm-hmm.
When really it's just why are these states not providing the resources where they should go to these communities, especially when immigrants give back? Like, we've seen it time and time again, how immigrants do contribute to this country, do contribute to the economy. It just doesn't make sense.
And this is people from different backgrounds, different parties, political parties. Mayor Eric Adams is Black. And the only reason I point that out is because there's a saying that I saw that says representation isn't liberation. And that just really stuck to me. It goes back to what I was saying in the beginning of diversity alone without inclusivity is not enough. And that representation alone isn't enough. And so if Mayor Eric Adams, that he's spreading hate on another community that he may not identify with, I mean, it's great that we have a Black mayor because maybe historically that's not the case. But if he's hurting another community in that sense, then that's not true liberation for all of us. Our job or purpose, destiny, whatever you want to call it, I think of just living in this society is trying to go against the status quo, as we've been saying, as much as possible, because that's what's going to prevent future Mayor Eric Adams or prevent future whatever, only if we change the root cause. Yeah. Because let's say Mayor Eric Adams resigns or they choose someone else next election. Okay, but then what? What's going to happen with him or what's going to happen with other people who think like him? Reform, but also just complete change in the system is really what we need.
Yeah, exactly. And we're bringing these as examples. Again, it's not just New York City, just using that in this case, and it doesn't necessarily tie to just these issues either. It's to everything. It applies to everything because at the end of the day, all of these social issues connect. Really, this season, we're hoping that we're able to bring up a lot more issues that we didn't really get to touch upon last season. A lot of things that are becoming more and more relevant and more urgent. So we're hoping provide more examples, I guess, of things that need a little bit more awareness. So we're hoping to provide that spotlight on those kinds of issues.
Definitely. And I know sometimes issues can seem abstract. So I think that's our goal of bringing these examples that we see in the news or we hear from other people that we see happening in communities that we either live in or connect with. Sometimes these things can seem too big or too not tangible. How can I do anything about it if I don't even understand what is justice, what is social justice? So bringing these examples can really say, well, maybe you don't know how to do about this whole issue right now, but you can take this one action for this one person right now, and then that'll be your start. So that really is what the examples is about. It's not about New York City or just anywhere else. It's just about trying to bring a face, if you will, to these issues because they're happening, unfortunately, all the time, everywhere. But we can do as much as we can, and that will lead to change. Change is the topic of this episode, I guess.
Honestly, I can see it kind of as a theme for this season too, in a way, because again, we are really excited to take what we've learned from last season and apply it to this one. And we're just really happy to have you all along for the journey. I think we've pretty much wrapped up a lot.
Yeah, thank you for coming back. If you're new here, thanks for joining us now. And if you haven't listened to season 1, it's a great context, but of course it's not a prerequisite. We're just glad you're along for here. And of course, reach out to us through email. It's in the show notes. Our email and Instagram is always there. Feel free to reach out. We respond to everybody because, as we always say on here, this is about building community. And we're showing examples that we hear about, but it's just 2 of us. So if you hear of an example that you really feel like needs to be told, let us know and we'll look into it. So season 2, y'all, let's go.
We hope you all enjoyed this episode. To learn more, follow us on Instagram at closingthegappod or email us at closingthegappod@gmail.com with questions or feedback. Thanks for listening. Until next time.